Okay, look. What you have to understand is that I am probably the longest running unironic fan of PPP. I think maybe 99% of people who know him just think he kind of spawned out of a gutter one day and started Kino Casino with Andy Worski. But that's not the case. I don't think people even know PPP has a meaning. People's Populist Press, it's literally in the title of the thread. Back when Ralph was actually really popular and raking in thousands of dollars off of YouTube, the atmosphere of the internet was completely different. I could best describe the streamers between Gamergate and the end of the Trump admin as a patchwork of similar to the tiles of the floor of a mental institution. Whoa, English 101. Locked in grout, respecting each other's boundaries, not very interesting or transgressive. But even in hyper-censored days, there was an underground. And this was back when Cal was still a thing. What some people, notably Godwinson and then PPP, would do is just boot up streams and talk the maddest shit that's ever been talked. And we'll see who he was talking shit about here in a second. They'd use cheap webcams or their phone propped up against a wall with the worst audio quality ever. Godwinson in particular had rules, styled after Dogma 95, an informal set of avant-garde cinematography rules he called Kino Dogma 2007. Audio quality, video quality, and film style had to be on par with 2007 YouTube, which he called the peak of YouTube. Godwinson calling certain unintentionally artistic things Kino is where PPP got the word. They were also very anti-grifting. Back during Gamergate, Patreon and Super Chat were called hipster welfare, and it was a mark of shame to have one. There's very famously a video of Medicare ridiculing someone for having a Redbubble selling things like clocks and their logo in it. Ricky Big Al, whatever that guy's name is. So those were the rules. JWS and People's Populist Press followed the rules, and the gambit was they were going to talk all the mad shit that the streamers and the organized for-profit streaming patchwork would never do, lest they risk the well-established hierarchy and their position in it. Matt Jarbo is a good example of what happens to someone who upsets the balance and gets dressed down by all the big boys. JWS and PPP having absolutely no financial incentive and no real audience, and no rules to play by. So they'd prop their phone up against the wall, open Google Hangouts, and use that to stream to YouTube without using OBS. OBS was abominable to the Kino Dogma, and then just air out all the laundry about the then untouchable Ethan Ralph. Now normally, a coked up Angloid and a big fat guy streaming to an audience of 40 people, I was one of them, should not upset the guys making tens of thousands of dollars doing the easiest job ever created. But it did. Even though Ralph's audience was 6,000 people on a good day, I don't know about that. The 100 or so Anons on Cow sharing clips of GWS PPP bullying Ralph drove him so up the wall, he'd start arguing anonymously in his own defense. They all did this, by the way. All those big boy streamers read Cow and would white knight themselves. I'm sure even Andy Worski did it. PPP's real gift as a performer is his background as a youth pastor. He has a classic American Southern Baptist style fire and brimstone way of casting condemnation on people, even when he does it without religious context. Though religious condemnations were way more common for him during this era, it is still very compelling. This is also where Coach Red Pill comes in, despite Coach not even being relevant to anything I've mentioned. For some reason, he loved Cal. He loved shit-talking streamers, and he had this enormous dating YouTube channel, but would still randomly post 3-minute videos of himself making fun of Ethan Ralph on Cal. He really thought GWS and PPP were the coolest kids on the block, and he coveted their approval, which clearly I do too after making this post. Over the years, 3 big things change. Medicare becomes a grifter, and by proxy, whatever Medicare does is okay for everyone else to do, because he is always the top dog in the hierarchy. Godwinson had a falling out with PPP. Without Godwinson to preach the dogma, PPP appears to have stopped caring about it. And 3, Mad at the Internet started. AD, before and after Mad at the Internet, and was the most successful podcast about internet drama in the sector for a long time. I believe that he looked at Medicare and said, I can grift better than that. Looked at Godwinson and said, I don't need that anymore. And looked at me, even though he whatever, we'll get to this, and looked at me and said, I can do that with more energy. and also can pronounce words with more than 3 syllables. So being someone with approximately 0 technical know-how, he called up the most senior streamer he somehow stayed on good terms with, despite saying that he would want to kill him mere weeks before this occurred, and said, "Let's do a show. I'm gonna make you rich, buddy." That's my theory. Early KC, I really didn't like. It was, and still is, very loud. However, the biggest improvement is literally just that PvP will talk over Andy without mercy now. I saw it was successful, but I didn't like it. I developed Stockholm Syndrome for KC after I started needing to do work after about 8 p.m. And for some reason, their time slot would occupy 8 p.m. to 4 a.m., which is exactly when I had shit to do. You might notice by this point, by the way, that I just refer to the Kino Casino as a whole by just saying PPP, my lord and master. I honestly do have a hard time saying nice things about Worski. We have had precisely one interaction before Kino Casino, and that was during the Tonkasaw boxing event. He had a really big chimp out with me on air and started calling his boxing promoter a dumb whore and all sorts of other awful shit while I was just going Worski over and over again in disbelief. But some reason, she didn't care at all and let him fight still. It's not that I don't like him at a personal level. I just don't really have anything to say about him. I've never discussed this with PPP, but I think the reason he's kept with Worski is either out of a sense of loyalty or my current theory is that Worski actually does a ton of show prep and generally does good work with the production that PPP doesn't think he can easily replace or do it by himself. I don't mean operating OBS, even though that's literally all he does. I mean watching hours of footage, clipping stuff, paying attention to news vectors that people like me do not pay attention to, totally don't pay attention to. Knowing basically everyone who has ever made appearances in the sector off the top of his head. I think those kind of things have immense, intangible value. So huge, too long didn't read, but PvP has always been one of the most transgressive shit stirrers in the sector. And what makes him really unique is that he did it for more than half a decade without taking a paycheck, just because he thought people like Ralph and Okada were sinners who didn't deserve the bounties they had been given. His turn from anti-grifter to grifter was an honest to God, the city deserves a better class of criminal situation. Oh, you love it. You know exactly what I'm going to play. Okay, let me sit down to effort post this. I've told a few people in confidence, but it's an incredible story, and I feel like I need it public record. I have never spoken to Jim directly. I think maybe once or twice he's tweeted at me. Any attempt I've made to contact him has failed. He wants nothing to do with this site. That said, when we get to the end of the audio and Brian says, "I don't want this posted on Kiwi Farms," Jim says, "I hope none of my 14,000 viewers post this on Kiwi Farms." Immediately, active users shoot up to about 30,100, and it's the highest it's ever been. It surpassed Chris's house being on fire or any of the various Tumblr drama that brought mainstream users on the site in droves. But it goes on. This audio is recorded like a good book. Can't write out the delegation of information any better. He admits he likes this dude, whose cock he's been talking about, wanting to suck for 30 minutes, who he wants to tie up, shave, and fuck because he's rough around the edges, and verbally abusive to him online. Suddenly, this is me dealing with this fucking epiphany. At first, I'm thinking, maybe no one else had that thought about it yet, and I had a good moment to reflect. Maybe this post I'm writing right now would be about that realization. Then, Jim stops the audio, turns to the audience, and speaks directly to me, reading me my thoughts to 14,000 people. I wasn't fully grasping with a weird, gross fucking realization with Brian, but this specific moment where this man I have never fucking spoken with is saying what I'm thinking in front of enough people to fill a football stadium left me staggering. It was a genuine Truman Show moment, an out-of-body experience. As a kid, I used to think about all the human experiences I'd never have. I'd never be a king. I'd never be a woman. I'd never be black. I never be part of the moon landing mission. I never see the Battle of Constantinople. It was a siege. The Battle of Constantinople. And while those things are impressive and impossible to experience at this point, I can say with pretty much absolute conviction that no other human being will ever have a Flight Club plot twist unveiled to them while a person they've never met reads their mind to a live audience of over 10,000 people. That's my human experience that I can keep to myself. And considering my life, that sounds appropriate. Whoa, fucking buddy. Whoa, fucking buddy. Whoa, buddy. Whoa, buddy. This is a literal schizo post.